The environment is actually our community. We are not far from it. I know our scientific way of looking at the world and even our kind of business models and stuff is a reductionist way of looking at the world, and we compartmentalize things. And now that the majority of people in developed countries live in urban areas, we are very much compartmentalized. Where nature's out there, the city is here. And it's become a strange place that we don't spend a lot of time in. We don't really have a good connection to. And we're the poorer for it, because we need to have that connection. Now, I grew up on a cattle farm in Michigan, and I had that connection. I mean, for all the hard work I did, there were times that I would just lay in the tall grass and look at the sky. And when I was probably 10 years old, I had this epiphany. I'm laying there and I'm listening to some Canadian geese fly, and then I'm watching them fly overhead. I'm watching the clouds, and then I realized it's all one thing. I am part of this. Laying there in the grass, I must have been like connected to the earth or something. I realized it's all one, you know? And I think I'm lucky in that because I haven't met a lot of people that have had that experience. And it was one of the stepping stones for me to understand how this world is. And too often as humans, we don't take the time to understand that or to appreciate it because, you know, what are we called? We're human beings. The being part is what we've lost. Now, so often we just say, well, we're humans, I'm a human, but we're human beings. Being is being here now, in the present moment, and appreciating the air we're breathing, the people we're around, the good food we have, the community we have. So, I really encourage people to tune into the being part of being human, okay? Now, some stuff I'm going to share with you now. I'm going to be Debbie Downer, because it's not a good picture. It's not good what's going on. And I will start off with a personal experience. In New York, I got to know some people who were involved and filed a lawsuit against the largest dairy in the state of New York. New York in the United States is the second largest dairy producing state. Well, they needed someone to do water sampling that could be sent to the lab so they could check well water, surface water, and so on for contamination, see what was going on, and do this over time so that there isn't just, you know, one sample doesn't stand in court. You have to have snapshots over time to see if it's getting better, worse, or staying the same. And I'm certified in the state of New York as a Class CD water operator, which means absolutely nothing to you. It really doesn't mean much to me anymore. But I was going out and I was sampling water in drain tiles coming off from fields, in bricks, in streams, the lake. The lake we're talking about is Cayuga Lake, which, if you know, if you've ever heard of Ithaca, New York, or Cornell University, that is the south end of the lake. So we're up about halfway up that lake is where all this is going on. Well, this is a dairy who on their website claims at any given time, between their main barns and their satellite operations, they're milking 16,000 cows a day. It's a lot of dairies. And Connie Mather is this person I've become very close friends with. And she was telling me what was going on, and I'm going, wow, this is really, you know, depressing. Because they use liquid manure management systems in these dairies. Even organic dairies use the same manure management systems. And what that means is the cows spend nearly all their time in these barns, concrete floors, and where they stand is a raised area, and maybe 3 inches down is a runway. Well, they wash all the manure down there with water, and then it becomes a slurry, and then there's scrapers that come down, and you know, they're automated, and they scrape it down, and it goes down a pipe, and goes out into a lagoon. where it's held, and then eventually they back up these big tanker trucks, and they take it out and spray it on the fields. There are a lot of things that are connected with this that are not good. I mean, we all know, well, you know, manure lagoons aren't a good idea because a good many of them are not lined, so they seep into the ground. There's leakage into the aquifers. But then you've got the problem with the gassing off of them. And you've got things like methane, carbon dioxide. You've got one of the worst things is nitrous oxide, where we know about carbon dioxide from car exhaust and so on. And that's about, you know, as damaging as it is to the ozone as a greenhouse gas. Methane is about 20, depending on the reports you read, the science you read, 26 to 30 times more aggressive on the atmosphere. But nitrous oxide is between 126 and 135 times more aggressive on the atmosphere. It's really nasty. But there's a lot of it that's gassed off from manure. Well, I had, kind of fast forward here, I had an experience what that was like to be around that kind of concentration of those gases. During this lawsuit, there's what's called the discovery process in the parlance of American legal system, which means that both parties, the farm and the citizens, they have to open up, their lawyers have to open up all the information they have to the other side, so that they can look at it and say, so theoretically, no secrets are being held back. Well, in part of this, we got to go with their people and their water guy onto their property. And I'm taking water samples all over this farm. I mean, we're talking thousands of acres. Took a whole day, from about 7 in the morning to about 10 at night. And we're doing all the sampling. The one thing we had to sample was the liquid from one of the lagoons. So this guy from this lab up near Syracuse, he says, we look at each other and he says, I said, you ready to do this? I said, no, I'm not. I mean, the smell is unbelievable. And he says, well, all I can suggest is just hold your breath as long as you can. He wasn't kidding. Because I got down there, I held my breath, we had to scramble down this bank, which is about here to halfway up this studio. I got down there, I had my stick with my bottle on it, I dipped a sample and started climbing back up, and I passed out by the time I got to the top of the bank. He did too.
Oh my God.
That's how strong those fumes are. Now, air quality-wise, this is a really big problem. Connie, who I mentioned before, lives right next to this whole operation. She was a school teacher, taught middle school, and they became this case study. Her family, she has one son named Sam, and Sam has grown up his whole life there. Well, being that Sam had a built-in tutor for all these years, he was always in the gifted programs and accelerated programs in school from elementary up through junior high. But something happened when he went through puberty. All of a sudden he started having cognitive problems. She started having cognitive problems. She was forgetting. Her short-term memory was like shot. And, you know, she would come home and forget to grade papers. And the next day she'd get up in the morning and get her briefcase and she goes, oh, I didn't grade those papers. And then it was just one thing after another. It just got worse and worse. Within a year she had to quit teaching because her memory was becoming so poor. Plus, something they've struggled with for years there were asthma symptoms or asthma-like symptoms, because they didn't have asthma. They had asthma-like symptoms. Well, one of the things that happened to Sam is when he went through puberty, all of a sudden his cognitive abilities went down to the point where he was in what they call the LD programs, or the learning disabled programs, by the time he was in high school. So he went from being a gifted kid to a kid who was in remedial classes. And to this day, he hasn't recovered, and he left. You know, he left that area. Doesn't breathe that. For now it's been probably 6 years. And he went in the military because he just didn't have any other prospects because he wasn't smart enough to do much else. So he went into the Marines. And, yeah, he's not too smart. But that's what Sam's choice was. And to this day, Sam has never regained those things. So during this building of evidence, they called neurologists in from New York City and California to study not only him, but other children, because they had noticed, teachers had noticed at the school system there, that they were having the highest rate of children in learning disabled class of any school in that part of the state. And nobody ever thought of equating it with the air quality and the water quality of the area, but in particular the air quality. So these neurologists worked on Sam and these other kids, and they found out that if you grow up breathing that air, you end up developmentally, because of hydrogen sulfide, you end up with this neurological developmental disability, and it's permanent. Now with adults, they moved away for a period of about a year and a half, because where they live, they're right across from where they store anhydrous ammonia and the machine sheds where they fix tractors and stuff, and the smells from that, especially the ammonia, would leak over once in a while. And they knew that they had to get their son away from this atmosphere. And they found out soon that it really wasn't helping. It helped all of their respiratory problems. Those disappeared within a month. And Connie's short-term memory came back, but it took almost a year. But the children never recovered. Now, here is the messed up thing about the legal system in America. When two sides of a case like this, they go through that discovery process and look at everybody else's evidence. Each side gets to pick out one thing that they can exclude from evidence in court in perpetuity, which means forever, even in appeals. And what the Dairies lawyers picked was the studies on the neurological deficiencies of children who grow up breathing that air. They can never ever use that. Well, also it was interesting going out and gathering samples. We found that, Connie told me, said, there's goons out here, they're going to try to drive us off. And I said, well, as long as we stayed on public property, which means the shoulder of the road and the ditch, and I took my samples from there off these fields, we should be good. And she said, yeah. But she was smart enough to always have a video camera. And a couple of times it didn't have film in it, but it's still such a deterrent against the guy who drives up in his pickup truck, starts yelling at us, has a shotgun in the back window of his pickup, and says either get the hell out of here or there's going to be trouble. You go, hey, we're not doing anything wrong. And she would call her cell phone and says, well, I'll call the state police and see if we are breaking the law. And boom, they'd take off again, their trucks and leave. They had 2 full-time employees at this farm. That was their only job, was to run people off. So anybody who tried to come and take pictures or water samples like we were doing, they just run them off. The interesting thing was the attorney, the environmental attorney that was working with us, he wouldn't believe us when we told him these things. He said, oh, they're not those kind of bullies. It's like, what kind of world do you live in? If you grow up in a rural area, you find out, yeah, the good old boy system exists, and it thrives. And we went through this for quite some time, and over a period of 6 years of working with them, I actually did some videotaping, some interviews with some of the people, and there was this one young girl who had just graduated from high school, and she had started out in cross country and then became a miler in track, but their school had to drop cross country because the air quality was so bad that the kids would start getting nosebleeds and cough up blood in training and in meets. Not the kids visiting the race, the kids who went to that school. But yet, the university, the land-grant university, the agricultural college in our area, defended them and said that this was fuzzy science and stuff, even though observationally you could see that these people are suffering. And I could go on water quality. There was a guy named Ed Coombs. His family had been there since 1798. And his wife died from the water in their well because he lived right next to a stream that basically just ran manure all the time. And the E. coli was so high in the well that it killed her, made him sick. The air in that area, he was 82 years old when he passed away. It was so bad that he had this constant inflammation of his eyes. His eyes were always like bloodshot, and his eyelids were always inflamed. And the doctors ended up surgically removing the edges of his eyelids so he didn't have any eyelashes. But it was to keep those ducts on the edge of the lids from becoming constantly inflamed. Then the problem went away. But he looked weird, you know. But Fred said, you know, they tried to buy him out. You know, he had a little farm. They tried to buy him out and tried to bully him out. And he said, no, he says, my family's been here longer than your family's probably been in the United States. You're not driving me off my land. And he ended up dying of colon cancer, which may or may not have been linked to that, but I'm sure it was to his lifestyle. I mean, he's got his beef cattle, and we know how that goes. And then down the road, when we finally get to court over this, the federal judge in Western New York, he ruled against us. And our attorney goes, why would he do that? You know, it was so conclusive. Our evidence was so, you know, boilerplate. And I said, well, let me look into it. He never thought of doing this. I really got, at least for this guy, the environmental attorney, not too bright. So what I did is I went online and I looked up the judge. I just Googled his name. And his court docket, his whole court, you know, his docket history is public record. So I went through it. Every single case that was between a corporation, which these dairies are, they're LLCs, limited liability corporations. Every single case that was a corporation against a citizen, he always favored, 100% of the time, was in favor of the corporation. And so you can see he was corporate friendly. And I shared this with the attorney. His name was Gary. I said, Gary, check this out. He says, oh my God, we're going to appeal. You think? So they did. But the appeals court in New York is over by New York City, and there's 3 judges who sit in judgment of that. So if you can get 2-1, you win. But it ended up being 2-1 against us. And then we were out of money. And couldn't take any part of it, and probably never will. And the other thing that they do when you file a case on environmental grounds against these farms, they usually, the first thing they hit you with is what's called a SLAPP lawsuit, S-L-A-P-P, which is an acronym that means Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. These lawsuits are big buck lawsuits that they throw against these people. They know they'll probably lose it, but it's only done to drain the finances out of the person who's filing the complaint. And the first round of that worked. You drained $10,000 out of it. They started a nonprofit to try to bring in money for support about this. They drained about $10,000 out of the coffers, and they were broke again. So they had to raise more money to pursue this civil lawsuit. Well, they lost. And since then, Connie went and became a full-time activist. She went up to Vermont, Burlington, and got a degree in environmental law. Found out even there in the last 5 years that the corporate influence on that law school, which is known as the most progressive environmental law school in the United States, has gotten to the point that you cannot talk about agriculture's impact on the environment. They will not allow it. It's off the table. No professors are allowed to talk about it, and students are shut down if they bring it up. So she drudged along, got that, and now she's out doing her thing. How many of you have seen the documentary Cowspiracy? If you haven't seen it, it's probably the most important documentary on the environment and the impacts of animal agriculture out there. And to give you a thumbnail, I don't want to be a spoiler, but the thumbnail of that movie is that all of the research, whether it's the UN report, which came out years ago, saying that 18% of greenhouse gases is generated by the livestock sector, which is more than all global transportation put together. So planes, trains, automobiles, all of it put together doesn't come to the greenhouse gases produced by the livestock industry. And then several years later, I actually was at a animal rights conference, got done with this rap session, and this guy was standing outside the door. He says, "Could I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." So he takes me down the end of this hallway, and we sat on a bench, and he says, "My name is Robert Goodwin." And he says, and I said, "Yeah, nice to meet you." I didn't know who he was. And he said, "Have you read the UN report?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you think of it?" I said, "I don't think much of it." And he says, "Why?" And I said, "Well, there's a lot of what they call externalities they didn't take into account." And I said that it's much worse in developed countries for their contribution. They looked at more sustenance farmers as well as everything from CAFOs to small farms in North America. But I said, for instance, one example, the main fertilizer for corn in the world is something called anhydrous ammonia. Well, it takes 100 cubic feet of natural gas to make 1 cubic foot of anhydrous ammonia. That's a huge carbon footprint. But they didn't talk about that. They didn't take that into account. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "we found quite a few of those things." And he says, "Well, I work for the World Bank. I'm a climate scientist." He said, "There's a team of us." And he says, "The International Monetary Fund also has a group of climate scientists. And we do the science on a variety of topics on whether money will be given out through the World Trade Organization or our organizations for development projects in the developing world." And I said, "Well, cool." He says, "And just to let you know, I'm a vegan." And I go, he says, "That doesn't influence my science." And I go, "Well," I said, "when will we be?" And then he told me what anybody can read. If you go to World Watch Institute's website, you'll find the report. And they say that according to their work, that it's around 51% or greater of greenhouse gases comes from the livestock sector, not 18%, 51% or more. And there's been a paper that's coming out, it's an international collaboration between Europe and North America, and Canada is actually part of it. There's scientists here who worked on it who say now it's more like 58%. That's off the scale. So, see this? That's how you're going to achieve it. Even if you eat a plant-based diet, you have to be mindful of the impact on the environment. Now, this is taking Debbie down to a lower level. Most of the salad greens we eat in North America are grown, at least in the United States, in the Central Valley of California. Now, every so often, whether it's conventional or organic, you'll get these recalls because there's spinach or lettuce or something that's got E. coli. So there's a contamination or recall. And they say, don't eat this stuff. But they don't talk about where the E. coli came from. It came from manure. Well, how does that work? Well, these farms in the Central Valley, California, remember, is the largest dairy producing state in the United States. It's huge. Plus, they've got massive feedlots there. You can see NASA photos of just how immense in Southern California these feedlots are. Well, lots of manure, especially in liquid manure management systems, like dairies and hog farms. So they've got all this manure that they have to get rid of. And how are they going to get rid of it? Well, they give it away. So even organic farms, according to organic standards, manure is an acceptable soil amendment. But the thing is when you're spraying it on the crops, you poop on the plant. And yeah, bring it and wash some of it off, but something they learned at Cornell several years ago is that, bacteria, and E. coli is a bacteria, they're very persistent and they evolve fairly quickly. So let's think of a urinary tract infection. Uncomfortable. But urinary tract infection is a strain of E. coli. That's what causes the inflammation, the infection. And it used to be that if you drink cranberry juice, the enzyme and acids in that would kill it and you're good to go. It doesn't work anymore. Well, Cornell, at their Geneva research station, they found out the reason why. That E. coli has developed this capacity to build over itself something called a biofilm. And they couldn't find a pharmaceutical or anything that could eat through the biofilm to kill the bacteria. But they did find one thing later on. It was raw garlic. Raw garlic juice destroys the biofilm, and it also kills the bacteria. And this is one of the reasons why we have problems. We have a food safety problem because of using manure as a soil amendment. Because also, whatever you put on or in the soil, the plants can take up. You can check that with the Rodale Institute. They have done more research in organic agriculture in the United States than anyone. And we now know that prions, they cause mad cow disease, and they're known as transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. In Ames, Iowa, at Iowa State, they've now identified over 1,000 different kinds of TSEs. There's not just the one that's in cows. They're in every herd of animals, in domesticated animals and also in free-living animals. So deer, elk, and so on. So this is a problem. If they can be taken up, we think, oh, well, I'm eating organic food, but it's being fertilized with this stuff. So there's a potential that you could end up with a TSE. What we think is a safe food system necessarily isn't. And I also am a proponent, if you check out my website, is that there is a new model for doing, and it isn't that new anymore, of doing agriculture on any scale, and we call it veganics. Or it's also known, the book, Growing Green, is also subtitled, what they call it in the UK, they call it stock-free agricultural organic agricultural practices. So it's growing stuff organically without using bone meal, blood meal, urine, feces from the animal kingdom, nothing from the animal kingdom. Because you have the potential from all of those things, from getting pathogens in your plants or on your plants, and causes a problem. So we try to eat organically, and really it can be a little problematic. Generally speaking, we don't get sick from what we're eating, but we are taking some chances. So I tell people, you got a lawn, what are you doing with grass? Pull it out, plant food. But now cities are pushing back against that. They don't want you to grow food in your front yard. Yeah, do it in the backyard, but not in the front yard. But if you want to produce enough food to last you for a while, you need to utilize everything you can. Support CSAs and get them to become vegan. Community support agriculture, farmers markets, go to them, have a conversation, say, veganics is really the way of going in the future. You can use less water and less land and produce just as much food as you are now. And they won't believe it until they research it, and when they research it, they'll say, wow, why didn't I do this years ago? So we have to be out there to educate them about this. Now, to come back to these reports that were done, in Canada, there's a think tank up here called Chatham House, and they peer-reviewed the science and looked at it, examined these reports, both the UN report and the World Watch report, and this other subsequent report, and said, are these things, scientifically factual? And they said yes. But here is the problem. We're globalizing the North American method of animal agriculture. Right now, China is the world's largest producer of pigs because of American agribusiness. India is now the world's largest producer of broiler chickens because of American agribusiness. And people say, oh, well, people are eating a little less meat in the United States. But according to the report, which I was just rereading last night, that China's overall meat consumption last year went up 6.2%, which is twice what North America's meat consumption went up. And they said this year, 2015, it'll go up another 6%. So it's growing. They're globalizing a Western diet, and we can't afford that. And we're 2 degrees Celsius from the tipping point of no return. And according to what Chatham House researched, they said that the forecast to put that out to 2030, you don't have that much time. Because as more and more the world becomes affluent, as economies grow in Asia, and you have a larger middle class, they're eating more meat. At the behest of fast food restaurants from the United States, agribusiness from the United States, really, can I move to Canada? It's so depressing sometimes what the United States politically is doing for the rest of the world in agriculture is just horrific. And we are going, they said that 2030 benchmark that like 350.org and these other organizations said that we may hit, it's actually backed off. They said by 2030 we'll be 4 degrees Celsius. We're 2 times over the tipping point. What's the answer? The answer is eating a plant-based diet. There's 2 really good books that I suggest everyone read. One is called This Is Hope by, Will Anderson is the writer. He worked for many, many years in the established environmental movement in the United States through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he saw how they're being lied to. The public is being lied to. So he quit, and he wrote this book. And the name of the book is called This Is Hope, Green Vegans and the New Human Ecology. It's a brilliant read. And then the other one is by Dr. Richard Oppenlander, a fellow Michigander, and it's called Comfortably Unaware. And there's a lot of good science in there. But you'll find out that we're in a crisis. We don't have time for baby steps. We don't have time for meatless Mondays. We don't have time to say, these little incremental steps. Yeah, you might think that that's going to be beneficial for the animals some way, but it's a disaster for the planet, for our air and water. Now, there's a certain mindset that drives all of this. This civil lawsuit that Connie was spearheading was 5 other families. She was the 6th family. 6 families were involved in this. And what it turned out to be is that they saw those 6 families as acceptable collateral damage to producing dairy products because it's a rural area, they can move out, we've offered to buy their land, and so on, but that's not the point. You can't do business and be a good neighbor and not destroy the environment, then what are you doing in business? Right? So they were seen as collateral damage, just like the cows are seen as collateral damage. The average life of a dairy cow, the mean age is 4 years old. It's an animal that can live to be 30. And it's a horrific life. I won't go into the dairy production, but it's a horrific life. And the psychology that drives this idea of this hierarchical idea that we can use animals and that the people that are connected to that can be used too. Not so long ago, a few years ago, in Southern California, the dairy in the Southern Valley, there was a dairy farm, where one of the pipes that takes the liquid manure out to a lagoon plugged up. So a farm manager came out there and he took one of his undocumented workers and gave him a short-handled shovel. He says, get down there and clean that out. Well, I know what it's like to be even in an open environment in a field with those gases. He was in a closed environment with those gases. He died. So he goes and grabs another worker, ties a rope around him, and said, the shovel's down there, go down there, clean that out, and pull your buddy out. He went down there and died. So the guy calls the police. Do you think the guy should have gone to jail? Yes. There should have been a fine? Yeah, there was. They deemed that since these people were undocumented workers, their lives were worth $300 each, so the farm was fined $600 and nobody went to jail. And in a rural court with rural people who have this connection to these industries that don't see any more value in those cows or an undocumented worker, or even the people that are white and work for them, their lives are really that much value. Everything is expendable. Everything is seen as a resource, not as an asset. You see everything as a resource, something to use and use up. And this is how these things intersect. We call it intersectionality. These things intersect in these ways, where Paul Farmer was a writer, and I love this one saying he has. He said, the idea that some life is worth less is what is wrong with the world. Think about that at any level you want. Politically, socially, economically, with the animals, it doesn't matter. You develop these hierarchies of worth in one way or another. And when we can devalue any other life in any way, it takes something away from us. And it takes something away from us collectively as a society. And we got to make that stop. And that's why, if you're for the environment, you have to go vegan. Because veganism isn't a diet. Think, you guys all know what a hologram is. And a hologram is made up of millions of bits of information that make the whole. Well, diet is one of those bits of information that makes up the whole of the hologram, of the image, of what it is. But there's so much more. It's about social justice. It's about environmental justice. It's about farm worker justice. It doesn't end. As Will Tuttle writes in World Peace Diet, one of his definitions for veganism is radical inclusion. And I build on that by saying that it is ethical and moral consistency. It's trying to live ethically and morally consistent in the world. So it's radical inclusion. Nothing is outside of our concern. Because what you do to one thing is going to happen to another. And when it comes to human psychology, when you can disregard one thing, you want to disregard something else somewhere down the line. So this is a way of living in the world that is about peace. It's about unconditional love. It's about opening ourselves up and having the strength of our convictions to know that having an open heart is what is going to change this world and make it a better world. Of course, we've got the sociopaths out there who see those emotions as weaknesses and will try to use them against us. Be vigilant. But don't let them take you down. And there's also entities out there that are psychopathic. They're called corporations. In the United States now, they are people. And they have political voice through money. That frightens the hell out of me. So we've got, at least in the United States, we've got psychopaths and sociopaths running the game. That's frightening. We're trying to change that. But as a community, we're the ones. All true change that's ever happened in the world has happened from the bottom up. Until you change the majority of people's way of thinking, way of connecting to the world, and opening their hearts, then you can't legislate morality from the top down. It has to come from the bottom up. Otherwise, it just won't fly. the environment is also something that it does, what land animal agriculture has done, you have to look, is horrific for aquatic life. So those beings who live in our waters, everything that you put on the land, anything you do on the land runs off, it goes somewhere. And as one friend of mine who's an environmentalist says, there is no away. We throw things away, he said, there is no away. It all goes someplace. So we've identified just over 500 dead zones in our oceans around the world. And nearly all of them, not all of them, but nearly all of them are because of agricultural runoff. And this has caused a problem where now we've got the acidification of the ocean, which is killing our reefs. We're seeing the overfishing of the ocean to support all land mammals. And you think, well, we're one of those, right? And people like to eat fish and lobster and all that stuff, but do you know that nearly as much of the tonnage that goes to feed humans is used for livestock, either for a soil amendment, to fertilize soil, or as a high-protein feed supplement. And if you want to learn more about that, look up the fish meal. Just Google fish meal industry. You're going to find out the two biggest players in the fish meal industry are China and Scotland. And they dredge the oceans. And the thing is there's so much about marine life that we don't know, or we're just learning. It's like for centuries, the Outer Banks of Canada and the United States, they fished cod. Fished it. Now you can't find cod. They're so rare. They're collapsing. They're going into extinction. What did they learn just a handful of years ago? Is that they're not sexually mature until they're 30 years old. A fish that isn't sexually mature until it's 30 years old. No wonder we've decimated them and pushed them onto the brink of extinction. But then we've got the problem with acidification of the ocean, but also with the climate change that's happening atmospherically. It's changing ocean currents. It's warming or cooling parts of the ocean that have never experienced those things before. So now in the United States, on our eastern shore, we're seeing sharks farther and farther north. New York City, you can see sharks out there. In my lifetime, you never saw sharks north of the Carolinas, maybe. So things are changing. And we've got to stop it. And we have to stop it now. And the most direct way we can do that is by what we eat. And why by what other people eat. And we should have an extreme sense of urgency in this. Well, for some reason, we don't see many organizations. Now, Cowspiracy, when you watch that, basically it's a video about shaming the environmental movement. They took this research, it is very well done, it's been peer-reviewed, and they contacted every nonprofit, NGO, environmental group in the United States. And they said, what do you make of this? They tried contacting Sierra Club, the big players, and they had this all on film. And they get stonewalled. Some people will interview, but they're very diplomatic. Well, we haven't looked at that science yet. But then later in the documentary, my fellow friend Will Anderson, he said the documentary, he says, I work for these people. They're lying to you. They've seen the science. Well, why aren't they telling the truth as environmental organizations? Because the environmental movement went through this shift from basically 1980 on, from being a grassroots movement in the 1970s, where we banned lead from gasoline, we banned DDT. There were so many things that happened. Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act in the United States, which was passed by a Republican president. President Nixon created those because they saw the urgency of it, because of the grassroots. The majority of people said, we got to do something, we got to do it now. But then these groups grew in both size and wealth, and then they decided, well, maybe we would have more of an impact if we sat at the table with the polluters and negotiated carbon credits, or talked about these things, And that's what it's turned out to be. Since the 1980s till now, these groups basically, as Will mentions, he says basically they're just moving the chairs around on the deck of the Titanic. We're going down. But they say, oh, we negotiated carbon credits between the number one polluter. They sold off 10% of their carbon credits to this other manufacturer. That's a victory. It's not a victory. You still have the same amount of carbon going into the air. The idea, it would be great if they could get those carbon credits taken off the table and have a carbon tax put in, but no, they won't do that. But when it comes to our food choices, why don't they say something? Because that shift from the grassroots to a corporate model of activism is what has become known as checkbook activism. And it's become kind of a joke in the activist world that whatever organization has the slickest, glossy handout or flyer is probably the one that people are going to write a check to when they get home and support. It's all about form and not about content. And that's sad. And these people don't want to be talking about food choices with their donor base, which I'm sure they all love their animals, they love their cats and dogs, but they don't want to jeopardize those checks every month by saying, you shouldn't be eating animal products. So they're just not going to talk about it. Now, since that documentary came out, 2 of the small NGOs that were listed in their list did put it on their websites. I think Oceana was one, and there's Rainforest Network, I think was the other one. So they're saying, yeah, well, Rainforest Network is kind of a no-brainer, because why are they cutting down the rainforest? Well, I saw one pushback article against Cowspiracy saying, well, the reason they're cutting it down is because the timber industry is cutting the forest down. Yeah, that's true. If you ever watch Stephen Colbert, in the Colbert Report, he used to talk about something called truthiness. Truthiness is telling you only part of the truth. So that's an absolutely true statement that loggers are cutting down the rainforest in Brazil. Well, why are they cutting it down? Well, yeah, for profit. Well, why are they being cut down? For 1 year, they can create grazing for beef cattle, and then it becomes row crop land for soybeans and corn. A lot of people don't realize that the largest beef corporation in the world is in Brazil. It's called JBS. And they have bought many of the beef operations from companies like Tyson and so on. They've bought it up to where down there, and even in Canada, and to where now they are the largest beef producer, what they call beef protein producer in the world. And they're decimating the lungs of our earth, which are the forests, to do it. And the same thing is kind of happening in the United States, because we've got the arboreal forests, which Canada and the United States share. But you probably, if you know a little bit about American history, we had in the 1930s the Dust Bowl, and basically the topsoil just left the Great Plains. So at that time, our president said, we've got to do something about this. So there was a huge civil engineering project, an Army Corps of Engineers, and they built a row of trees, literally from the border of Canada all the way down to the panhandle of Texas. And that was to slow the wind down over those flat plains, and it worked. Plus they did some re-engineering of the landscape, because it's pretty flat, but re-engineering on how they plowed it. Instead of plowing straight east to west, which is called windrowing, so that your rows of corn, the wind will pass right through them, and not because you put the rows this way, wind hits them and lays them down. So you windrow your crops, but then they've got these creative kinds of windrowing that wouldn't flatten them, but it wouldn't it would cut down the velocity of the wind. But that tree line, which was planted in the 1930s, is now disappearing because they haven't maintained it. People are using it for firewood and other things. But it is just expansion of land for crops. So they're cutting them down to create more cropland. and more grazing land. So they're doing in the Great Plains of the United States what they're doing in Brazil, and we're starting to experience it, different things. Even NOAA, the National Oceanic Administration, who watches our weather, they said that they think this may have an influence on why we're getting more and more violent windstorms, mainly tornadoes, in the Midwest and the Great Plains. It's because that natural barrier is gone. Nothing's to slow down the weather. And it just builds, and now we are experiencing things like bi- and trivector tornadoes. And if you've seen these things, I've lived through some tornadoes, they're scary. And you now, instead of just seeing one twister tearing across the landscape, and usually they only stayed on the ground. This is one thing that's changed with climate change with them, where they would stay on the ground for max 20 to 30 minutes. Now they can stay on the ground for an hour or longer. And they're bigger. The base of them sometimes usually wasn't any wider than this room, but now they can be a mile wide. And they destroy towns. And instead of just seeing one funnel come down, now you see 2, 3, 4. The most they've seen is 6 in one cloud that come down and just destroys everything in its path. These are now called multi-vector tornadoes. And it's because we have more, the oceans are warming up, we have more latent moisture in the atmosphere, so our storms are getting more severe. Our winters are getting harsher, our summers are getting hotter, and the storms are getting more severe. But we can change that. We can change that by and to be quite honest, I don't expect you to believe a damn thing I'm telling you. Honestly. You can't, Buddha said the only truth you have in life are the things that you have experienced directly. Otherwise, it's just information, it's just knowledge, but it's not a truth. That's a good piece of wisdom. So I challenge everybody to do your own homework. Go on World Watch Institute, read the research, read the citations. I don't ever believe anything I read, if it deals with the environment, it deals with agriculture, it deals with politics, or it deals with nutrition. Sorry, Brandon. I don't read the citations. I want to know who paid for the research, because it can skew things, especially if you get research out of the United States. Because in the 1980s, our federal government changed. Up until that point in the United States, no college could make money off something that they invented or moved the ball ahead on, whether it was technology or anything else. That changed. Now there's a profit motive in education as far as science and research. That has skewed things in a very dangerous direction. And the one thing that we forsook a long time ago, I don't know if we ever had it, is something called the Precautionary Principle. And nearly all of Europe uses this. Whenever there's a new technology, a new innovation, they look at it, what are the long-term effects that we can see that might be the consequences of this 10, 20, 30 years down the road. That's why they don't allow GMOs. Because they said, we don't know. We know what the short term is. It makes cattle sick. And luckily they don't have to live beyond a year and change, because they're going to die anyway because of what we're feeding them. So, if you raise livestock, you know how that works. Why do you think at Monsanto's campus in St. Louis, Missouri, their own research facility, none of their commissaries serve GMO food? They only serve organic food. Because their own science shows that this stuff is not food, and it's not good for your health, and it will make you sick, and it could possibly kill you. Because we know that's what it does to farm animals, because that is their main market. So, there's your motivation. Look at all these people out here providing you great food. And everything I've stuffed down my throat so far in the last 2 days has been organic. And the one thing I have learned from talking to the people I'm buying the food from, it's made with love. Right? That's what sets us apart. That's what sets us apart. And Al Gore was the first person I remember saying this. The environment is a moral issue. And that's absolutely true. Yeah, it's a scientific debate, but it is a moral issue. And we have to decide, where do we come down on that? And when you decide that it's something worth preserving, something of value to all species on this planet, because quite honestly, planet Earth will get along fine if we're all gone. It'll survive and it'll regenerate itself. It'll take time, but it'll do it. Guaranteed. But we're not going to make it. Not if we don't change things now. Not in a year. We don't change our behaviors now, it may be too late. And that's why we have to have the courage of our convictions to go out and talk to people about the nutritional aspects of this. Because for some people, their own self-interest is more at stake. So they're like, I'm not real good health. Well, if you eat an organic, plant-based diet, how you can reverse your type 2 diabetes? Or that there's all these other things. You're just going to feel better. And what do you got to lose? It's only food. We're not talking about some drug that the commercial on TV, that 90% of the commercial is side effects. No side effects. What do you got to lose? So, for other people, maybe they are concerned about the environment. Say, share the information, share conspiracies, share these books, and say, this is why we have this urgency, this sense of urgency. We are running out of time. We are beyond the 11th hour. Bill McKibben said that we are beyond the 11th hour. He says, that doomsday clock is like at 11:30, 11:35. We're running out of time, folks. But it's not too late. We can still change this game. But it's up to us. And activism is not something that happens off the couch, right? Get up. Well, it could happen on the couch. Social media is a great tool. Don't sit there too long. Use bed sores. So, use social media. Any tool you can think of to spread the word about how we need to change this, and for all the reasons we need to change this. Because if we truly want a more compassionate world, a more loving world, that's going to happen through our example. And then our love and our compassion has to extend to the natural world. And then we don't live outside the natural order, we're part of it. So, I thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of the day. There's a table out there. This shirt, there's another shirt that's really beautiful, has a beautiful graphic on it. Connect with these folks. You've got this movement going on in Toronto and in this province. This is where it starts. This is a grassroots movement to make a difference in the world, to say, if you are truly an environmentalist, you must go vegan. So get out there and support them.